we changed our mind at the last minute. We're going to bring a division headquarters in to work this problem. And so you get those kind of challenges. And when you're building stuff in the middle of the desert, when there's really nothing there, when you change the quantity and numbers and makeup of the personnel, let's say you change it from 40,000 to 45,000, that may not seem like much, but when you're putting this together, that's a hell of a number to change. So we would get those kind of challenges. I don't know if you got to the point in my book about the Mosul Dam, about they thought it was going to break and flood flood Baghdad. I mean, it was just crazy kind of stuff that would get, the kind of problems you would get were it's the kind of thing you just shake your head at and go, I didn't realize that was a possibility.
Why didn't you write your book about that second tour?
The plan has been for almost a decade now to do exactly that, but I've not. And part of it is there are quite a few books on surge. From the combat side specifically, I would take a different tack, obviously. But I haven't. In fact, I started buying books on the surge now because I'm going to do it. It would be more of an academic book. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Where I actually have to have references. Where my book, it's my experience, and so there's none. There are no references to any book because it's not about that. It's about what I saw. So it was a lot easier. And actually, my book began as something for my grandkids more than anything else. So I had to take stuff out.
Right.
So my grandkids could see it, but I don't let the average person see it.
Well, for a guy who got an F on his 3-page paper, that first paper that you wrote, that's a funny story.
Well, they didn't give grades called an F in the War College. They said it was unacceptable, I think is their words. Right. Yeah. But they. And I actually tried to get it right. I mean, it wasn't that I threw stuff together. I actually worked on it. So, I mean, but it shows that no matter where you are in your life, you can actually do something to be better. And I believe that you can always improve yourself. You always need a goal.
Well, this is going to be a great conversation. Thank you, Doug. This is going to be a great conversation. We are going to go live now and let everybody in from the waiting room. Hey, Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to our VBC Happy Hour. This is Todd DePastino, and you are with the Veterans Breakfast Club. And I am with Sean Hall, our program director. Hello, Sean.
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. I think Sean and I went about 2 weeks without really talking much to each other. And he said it was like the best 2 weeks of the year. So, and Ellie, however, I have talked to Ellie because I'm related to her. Hello, Ellie. How are you?
Doing pretty well, trying to, remain spirited with the 4 inches of snow on the ground, but I know there'll only be more in Chicago, so.
Yes, and it is a frigid night here in Pittsburgh. And I want to let you know, if those of you who haven't joined us before, we're the Veterans Breakfast Club, and we're a nonprofit based in Pittsburgh, but now we do these events online where we get people from all over the country and all over the world. And we're really about veteran stories. And we've been having these events where veterans share their stories since 2008. We're all into having veterans tell their stories, sharing those stories with others, capturing the stories, preserving the stories. If you are somebody who raised that right hand and took the oath, we want to hear from you. And it doesn't really matter when you served or how you served or what branch of service or how long you served, whether you liked it or didn't like it, what your job was. It's fascinating to people like me who never served and for whom the military was a world that I was never introduced to as a kid growing up in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. It was, my dad had been a veteran, but he didn't really talk about it. I wasn't from a military family, and there was no expectation that I would ever go into the military. So I became an adult, quite an older adult, before I really knew the first thing about what serving in the armed forces entailed. And it's been a heck of an education for me ever since. So thank you all for joining us, especially if you're not a veteran. Thank you for joining us to share in this conversation. We do have a special guest tonight, Brigadier General Doug Satterfield. Hello, Doug. How are you? You are joining
Excellent.
us from what, a foot of snow in southern New Jersey?
The last time we measured it a couple hours ago, right?
I think I think the people here are going to love talking with you and hearing from you, because you are, first of all, get this, everyone, 40 years in the Army. 40. Joined during the Vietnam era, retired in 2014. I mean, and this is my favorite part, which we didn't even talk about, didn't even mention before we went live here. General Satterfield entered the Army in 1974 as a private. How many people do that, Doug? Is that a common thing, to rise from private to general?
That's pretty uncommon, because you eventually time out in the system. And I was, just by sheer luck, I guess, was managed to squeak under a number of timelines in there. And a lot of it has to do with age, because you can age out in a number of, because, hey, war is a young woman's game. It's not somebody old like me. So at a certain point, you're out. In fact, when I retired, they sent me an email saying, "You're done." That was how they notified me.
That was it.
I got an email, right? So, and it was nice. It was nice of them. I said, "Okay, got it. We're good." And that was it. That's how they do it.
Yeah, I mean, there you were. You were already a 30-year veteran when you went into combat for the first time.
Pretty close to it, right? That was right. That's about right. Pretty close to 30 years, and that was an awful lot of training. There were a number of times it was very close, like the first war in Iraq. We were actually sitting on our rucksacks ready to fly in to Kuwait before the war kicked off. And when it kicked off, they said, hey, we're going to delay you 4 days because they might bring the airport under fire. So we're going to wait 4 days and we'll fly in. Well, 4 days later it was over. So they're like, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to send you in. Right. And when I say me, I was part of an entire heavy engineer battalion, which is quite large. So it was cheaper not to send us. Right. Never got a chance before that. Just a fluke. Draw the straw.
So Doug Satterfield was 51 years old. He was part of an engineer group attached to the 1st Cavalry Division. And you're going to hear his story. His story has been captured in a wonderful book that I'm about halfway through called Our Longest Year in Iraq. I'm not going to lie, I didn't finish it, unfortunately. 1st Cavalry Division construction engineers in the Iraq War. And man, is that an education. And I have a lot of questions for you. And I think a lot of people on tonight will have questions for you also. And I also want to say this. I am grateful to you, Doug, for your forbearance with me, because we originally scheduled to have you on December 13th, if you recall. And then as December 13th approached, I emailed a person named Doug and I said, like, hey, looking forward to you coming on 13th and hear the details. And he said, great, I'll be there. And then the next day I realized I'd emailed the wrong Doug.
It's okay. Not a problem.
And so then I sheepishly approached a retired brigadier general and told him I sent the email to the wrong person, sir. And you didn't chew me out.
That's not my thing. Even though I will tell you, though, as one of my jobs in the Army enlisted I was actually a drill sergeant. So I do have some history of chewing people out. And in those days when I was young, it was very entertaining for me, not for them. But I'm beyond that now.
Okay, we want those stories too. We want to hear that stories too, because we've had a couple programs on the job of a drill sergeant, and I've learned enough to know that it's a heck of a difficult job, but a very rewarding one. So I do want to ask you about that. But before we get to Doug and his story, I do want to let people know that we have brought back, or we are bringing back, our Wednesday morning coffee hour at 9 a.m. Every Wednesday morning for January, February, and March. We're going to be getting together at the same Zoom address and having our programs. So that'll start on Wednesday, January 5th. And we're going to have our coffee hour, our Veterans Breakfast Club coffee hour. And we're going to have some an interesting conversation with some people, at least two, maybe a third person, George Zwagstra and Dagmar Weiss Snodgrass, who grew up in Europe under Hitler. George under occupation in the Netherlands, Dagmar in Berlin. They both have fascinating stories to tell. You can see George's picture here on the left with his older brother, Pierre. Both of them, look at that picture. Both of them were active in the resistance. I mean, when the war was over, George was 10 years old, and he was a messenger in the resistance. His older brother, Pierre, who was 16, was extremely active and in a lot of danger there. They both immigrated to Canada after the war. This is a picture of George in the Canadian Royal Air Force. He served in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s. And then Dagmar has just an incredible story of survival in Berlin during the war. And some of you may remember her from 2020 when we had her on with the wonderful Gail Halverson, who is a legend in American history for his role as the candy bomber in the Berlin airlift. And Dagmar received one of his candy bombs, a little parachute, a little package of candy in a little parachute that Gail dropped from his airplane. So we had Gail on in 2020 and Dagmar joined us. So join us on Wednesday morning if you can, 9 a.m. Eastern. This is a conversation about growing up in Hitler's Germany. And we're also going to have two people, Alan and Tracy, from an organization called Save the Skymaster. They are restoring a C-54 Skymaster that flew in the Berlin airlift, as well as in World War II, in Vietnam, and in humanitarian missions around the world. And they have a wonderful project in England restoring this plane and using it for educational purposes. So we're going to have them on to talk about the history of the Skymaster, of this wonderful plane in particular, and the model in general, which played such an important role in the 20th century American history. And then we have a special program on Monday, January 10th at 9 a.m. We never have 9 a.m. programs on Monday, but we are now. And do you know why? Because when your name is Sir Max Hastings, you get to choose when your program is going to be. And because he is in Great Britain, this is a convenient time for him. So Max Hastings is probably the most eminent historian, writer of World War II history. And he's agreed to come on for about an hour, and he's going to come on with 3 World War II veterans of the Merchant Marine, Ray Cameron, Percy Smith, Hugh Brody, courtesy of Scott Masters in Toronto. And we're going to have a conversation about the role of the Merchant Marine in World War II. Max, one of the books he's written is Operation Pedestal, which is about a convoy that was just barely made it to Malta in 1942 to resupply that really important British base there in the Mediterranean, and how many merchant mariners died in that effort. So we're going to have that conversation on Monday, January 10th at 9 a.m. with Sir Max Hastings, the author. And then that night, this is a doubleheader, we'll be back on. That time is wrong. It's not 9 a.m. It'll be 7 p.m. for our happy hour once again. And this is going to be with Paul Hauser, Glenn Buchanan, and other people who were weapons controllers during the Vietnam War. We're going to learn about the job of Air Force weapons control and what a radar scope is, what radar does, and how inherently dangerous. That's the title of Paul's book. And it's because of this. Air traffic controllers, their job is to keep planes away from each other. Weapons controllers are often to bring planes right towards each other. So it's a inherently dangerous mission. So that's what we have coming up. Sean, what about the scuttlebutt? Do we have anything coming up there?
Yeah, my next recording is going to be with Ben Wright, who's here on the call tonight, and two also reverends recording on this Thursday. Ben, I wonder if you want to give us a bit of a preview of what we're going to be talking about on Thursday.
Sure. We're going to have Mike Wertsmith, who runs Shepherd's Heart Fellowship in Pittsburgh, does a lot of taking care of the homeless in Pittsburgh, and about 40% of those veterans. He particularly has a heart for veterans and helping them become back self-sustaining individuals again. And we're also going to have Eric Fenton, who was an active duty Air Force chaplain for over 20 years, has lots of stories about deploying with squadrons for combat operations, particularly in Desert Storm and elsewhere, and what he was able to do ministering to people engaged in combat operations. So should be a good time.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. We did an hour with you during our Vetathon last year, during the 24-hour Vetathon. And both gentlemen were a part of that. I thought it'd be a great idea to bring them back on, do a podcast of it, reach a different audience. Excited for that. That'll be released this coming Monday.
And I got to tell you, Mike Werschmidt is one of the most dynamic speakers I've ever heard. So if you want to, yeah, he's a wonderful deliverer of the message. Okay, Doug Satterfield, let's start this conversation. I'm gonna ask you the strangest question you probably will ever get. First question that you will ever get. You spent 40 years in the Army? I imagine you had many, many appointments with Army dentists over the years, correct?
Yes, I have.
Were they as terrible as I've read about in this article in Task and Purpose? Tell us your good, bad, and horribly painful stories about military dental procedures.
I was quite fortunate that believe it or not, many of the dentists that worked on me were actually Air Force dentists. Now, I don't know the reason for that, but I always had quite good service from them. So thank you very much. I did have, in one of my deployments to Iraq, I did have a Special Forces medical doctor do an emergency work on a tooth, a cap that I had, and underneath it, it had abscess. And he drilled a hole in it, and he goes, "I haven't used these tools in 20 years, so you're my test case." And I go, "Oh, okay." And
just what you want to hear. Just what you want to hear when you're in the dentist chair.
Yeah, so it worked out. My experiences were always positive, but also I was very careful about taking care of my teeth properly too.
Yes. Well, this article, I was really stunned by it, reading it's an absolute takedown of military dentistry. And it begins with the easiest way to find out if people have ever served in the armed forces is to ask them to open their mouths. If you see a bunch of metal fillings and other dental work that uses Civil War technology, you know that person has been treated by a military dentist. And we have a number of dentists, Doug, who join our Veterans Breakfast Club events. And I thought they should be given time for a rebuttal, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
So, Ken Ruzicki, you are one of those notorious torturers called an Army dentist.
I
you read that?
Two things that you said, notorious and torturer.
Ken was a dentist in Vietnam, an Army dentist. Did you read the article in Task and Purpose?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Yes. I'm getting a reverb here. At any rate, yeah, I did read it. The thing that struck me was these were Marines, and Marines are taught to be tough. I mean, you don't complain about anything. But there is an interesting story about Navy dentists. When I was up in Dong Ho, we didn't have an X-ray machine, at least at first. And I needed to do a root canal on a trooper. And there was a Navy dentist nearby because we had Seabees and Marines on the post. And I called him up and I asked him if he had an X-ray machine. Yes, I do. Could I bring this trooper up? Or yes, you can. So I went up there and oh my God, his facility, he had a fully equipped trailer and including an X-ray machine. And he was kind enough to allow me to do that procedure on that patient. And he and I, we hit it off really well. As a matter of fact, the Navy had continuing education courses down in Da Nang. And so he and I would fly down on a helicopter, land on an island in the middle of a river. And there was a telephone there. and you'd call ashore for a launch to come and get you. So the first time we were down there, he called, this is Lieutenant so-and-so. And we waited a while, and finally a launch came, took us ashore. Another time I went down by myself, and I picked up the phone. This is Captain Rizicki. I'd like a launch. Oh, boom, within 2 minutes, the launch was there. Next time I went down by myself, and I said the same thing. This is Captain Rizicki. I need a launch. Is that Navy or Army, sir? He said, that's Army. Yes, sir. We'll be there as soon as we can. And it took about 15 minutes that time. At any rate, no, the Navy facility, that facility was top notch.
All right. And that's what Chad Riddle would say too. Chad, you emailed me today saying that you had good dental work in the Navy.
I did. I was at the Naval Submarine Base in Groton, Connecticut, and it was either in 72 or 73, I think 72. And I needed 2 crowns replaced in the front, and they're still there. And I've even had other dentists said, that's pretty good work to last that long. So, General, I'm glad you got good work too.
Thank you. I never really had any trouble. I will tell you, though, that I am missing a few teeth they had to take out, and nothing went in after that. But I'm not complaining. At least I got a tooth, and that's all that counts.
Well, I think it's going to be, if anybody doesn't have anything else to add with this this story, I think this is a conversation we're definitely going to want to get Elaine Berkowitz in on this. She's a Army dentist who served in Iraq. I think we'll continue the conversation. But let's talk with Doug Satterfield now about his service in Iraq, and actually his 40-year service in the Army. I have a slide. I'm going to share with you his book. This is it on Amazon, Our Longest Year in Iraq, the 1st Cavalry Division Construction Engineers in the Iraq War, 2004-2005. This was the first of 3 tours that General Satterfield would do in Iraq before he retired. And remember, this comes towards the end of his career, towards the end, after already a long career in the Army. And I do want to just begin by asking you, Doug, why did you choose to join the Army as a young man in 1974?
Well, it really wasn't a choice, not because of the draft. The draft was over because where I grew up in the Deep South. Every real man had been in the Army or was a Marine. That's the way it was. And if you were a private, it didn't matter your rank. If you did honorable service, then you were a real man. So it was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this. That's what everybody else does. So I'm just going to do it too. And of course, you got to remember in the 70s, there were large numbers of people that were in the military. Of course, we were at the end of the draft. Vietnam was winding down. But there was very large numbers, and I was just one of millions that just went in and joined the military. Now, don't get me wrong, when I grew up, I'm a bit of a product of my upbringing. I grew up around World War II and Korean War veterans, and I talked to them all the time, and they told me some great stories. Now, I'll be honest with you, I never admitted to anybody, but scared the crap out of me when they told me these stories. I'm thinking, how could you do something like it? Just doesn't make, just how could you not, mess your pants? I just don't understand. But I can name, when I was a kid, I could name all the generals of World War II and a couple admirals. And I could also name everybody on the New York Yankees baseball team too. All these, Whitey Ford, Yogi Berra, Mickey Mantle, Art Dittmer, and that sort of thing. I could do that. And I learned a lot from the combination of these veterans, mostly combat veterans, and the Yankees. Now, how does a kid adopt the New York Yankees growing up in the Deep South? Well, because my dad was a Yankees fan, and he grew up in the Deep South, and we just adopted a team because there was no professional team in the Deep South where I was at the time. And so we adopted New York Yankees, and I remained a Yankees fan forever. And I've actually got to see them now because I live up to the Northeast. I actually got to go to a few games, but yeah, it was just a thing you did. There was no real thought there.
Yeah, but Doug, it's one thing to join the Army as a kind of a stage in the life cycle where you put in your time, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and then move on with your life. But to join the Army as a career, as a Did you have any idea that you were going to stay for 40 or make a career out of it?
No, I was just hoping to get through the first couple of years without getting killed, from the sergeants that just love to torture me in many ways. So, but it was my goal. I did grow up also. I did watch TV. I saw a number of television shows. You may remember them: Hogan's Heroes, Combat, Rat Patrol. All black and whites for the most part. But Combat, they had this, sergeant on there that there was an infantry sergeant, World War II. And he was the best guy for his team. And my proudest moment was eventually making the rank of sergeant in the infantry. I was so happy that I did it. My life's mission was fulfilled at that point. But I also discovered that I was helping officers. I typed up officers' term papers for their master's degrees. And I learned real quick that they were not necessarily any smarter than me. And I go, well, I can do that. Plus, I got kind of tired of them taking credit for what we did. So, okay, we would do the work and they would take the credit. And I go, what's up with that? And so I said, I'll do that. And so that's ultimately why I decided to get out as an enlisted man after 7 years and go back to college, finish college, and then go from there and go back as an officer. And I went back as an infantry officer originally. And later I switched over to engineers because my training in college was engineering. So
you were an engineer. You graduated with an engineering degree from college.
Right. Chemical engineering, which is pretty rare for somebody to be in the military, to join with a chemical engineering degree. And most of them are in the chemical corps, but I refused. I did not want to go in the chemical corps. To me, that was kind of like studying leadership. It was boring stuff. I didn't like it. And so I just became just one of the other engineers. I quickly discovered in the Army that most of the engineers are not degreed engineers. They've gone through their basic course, but they're not degreed engineers. They're political science or sociology or something like that. And they made them engineers. And I figured, well, I can make some advancements because I actually have a degree, and I have experience as an infantryman, and that should help as a combat engineer. And it was. So I got to be a combat engineer. So I was pretty happy about that.
Yeah. I mean, you're a chemical engineer, but there you are in Iraq judging whether troops could sleep in a building that might be compromised. It might not be a safe, you're doing on the spot kind of judgments about the safety of buildings. It's, I guess there's a lot of learning on the job.
Right. There is, because I was taught how to blow things up, and which is, by the way, it's a lot of fun being a combat engineer. You get to blow stuff up. As a construction guy, you get to build it. But if you build it, you know where all the weak points are, so you can blow them up. I had a good time. A lot of bridging. Even in the desert, you do need bridging because there are canals or rivers that have to be breached. We had a lot of fun doing bridging. A lot of stories on bridges for any engineers that are out there from Vietnam and earlier. You probably heard of the Bailey Bridge. Mm-hmm. The Bailey Bridge, we actually discovered them a large stockpile in Iraq, north of Iraq, in a little place called Taji, and we were able to use that Bailey bridging for bridging across a number of canals. Now, I'll tell you, we don't use Bailey bridging today in the Army. I actually had to go back to the Engineering Museum at Fort Leonard Wood and get the manuals for the Bailey Bridge sent to us, and to have some of the models that they had. They actually took it literally out of the museum, the models of what the Bailey Bridge looked like, and shipped them to Iraq so my guys could actually get a little education on how you put together a Bailey Bridge. I mean, it would take them time to figure it out, but we were very fortunate working with the engineer school and the museum out of Fort Leonard Wood. And so, that's the kind of issues that you run into all the time. Bailey bridging is a great form of bridging. I believe it was World War II they actually started using the Bailey Bridge, and so we put a hell of a lot of it up. I don't think Saddam even knew he had it.
Hold it. So you found these Iraqi Bailey bridges in Iraq, and you thought, hey, they're good bridges, might as well put them to use. It just so happened that Army engineers didn't use them anymore.
Right. They were U.S. military bridging that had been purchased by them because we sold it all off in the Army. We sold it, and he apparently bought a lot of it. The reason we used it is because we didn't have enough of modern bridging equipment. We didn't have enough. we were out. We had used it all up. So now we're using whatever you find. And that's what you do in combat. You find something, you use it. And we did. We thought it was a great decision. In fact, we had to stop people from stealing it because they were using the metal to reinforce the roofs of their of where they lived. And we're like, no, you can't do that. This is bridging material. We're going to actually they were using the decking to protect themselves from incoming rounds. So we had to get as much of it as we could back to us. And so that's the kind of issues you run into. You're short bridging, you find some, you use the other guy's bridges. So we did.
You order the manual from a museum back home.
Right. We ordered the manual from that. There were a number of senior NCOs at Fort Leonard Wood, which is now the engineer school and among others, for the United States Army. And we were able to talk to them as well and about the problems we had run into. And our guys were using that bridging. It was a great cooperation between the schoolhouse at Leonard Wood, the museum, and us that were actually fighting the war in Iraq. It was a great cooperation.
My jaw drops about every 10 pages when I'm reading your book. And it's because it's something, you say something that I should have really realized, but I didn't. Like, for example, I mean, you said when you land, and I should let people know that you arrive in Iraq with the 353rd Engineer Group attached to the 1st Cavalry Division. You're in charge essentially of building everything that about 40,000 soldiers are going to need to live and work and fight in central Iraq around the Victory Base complex. And, think about that. Think about, and this is infrastructure that should be Army infrastructure, Army water, sewage, housing, chapels, recreation facilities, mess halls, headquarters, PXs. I mean, you name it, walls, entry points controlled entry points where people could come on, to a base and you could control who enters it. Watchtowers. I mean, roads, they all had to be built because the level of damage already in early 2004 in Iraq was stupefying. I mean, this was much of the country was not working. It was in rubble. And you had to start almost from scratch, right?
Yes, we did get to build a lot of things, but you got to remember, ultimately, it was the commander, the commander, in my case, of the 1st Cavalry Division determined what we were to do. And he wanted to make sure that, number one, we were able to operate outside the military bases that we had in order to take the fight to the enemy. So my goal ultimately was to make sure that when these fighters were back on the bases, and we had over 100 bases in the 1st Cavalry Division area, from combat outposts to large bases like Victory Base Complex, that they had a level
I'm sorry, Doug, I'm so sorry. I'm going to interrupt you again, just because I want this to sink in. Over 100 bases for the 1st Cavalry alone.
Yes, that's correct.
Some of them are little with maybe just a couple hundred soldiers or even fewer. And then
right.
Some of them are
some may have as much as a couple platoons, maybe 50, 60, 70 people on it. Some were quite large, where they were in the tens of thousands. That was Victory Base, but there were many bases that were scattered everywhere. So I would spend a lot of my time moving from base to base. That's why it's important to talk to the privates, because you find out what they really need, where the commander doesn't necessarily agree. So it was important. So my goal ultimately was to help that soldier, and I say soldier because I was Army only at that time. That soldier had a place to go to that had some air conditioning and had that was safe from rocket fire and mortars. We never were able to accomplish the latter, but I can tell you, at least we were able to get power. And power, the U.S. military runs on power, laptops, including coffee pots. I can't live without my coffee. So we all had that. So you had to have power. Power was a real serious issue in Iraq, especially in early. Just a frame of reference. The war started in 2003. By 2004, the main thing we were concerned about was actually building up the concentration of troops. We were bringing in large numbers of troops, so it was growing significantly. And in doing that, we had to build all these facilities or repair existing facilities. So there was the challenge for engineers was overwhelming. And the thing that we ran into right away, in addition, was we didn't have enough engineers. Military engineers just simply, we didn't have a tenth the number. That meant we had to hire people to do it. So many were third world nations would come in to do work for us, but the bulk of our workforce was Iraqi. And we did not understand, we did not know the Sunni, Shia, Kurd divisions that existed at the time. And so there were a number of fights. There was sabotage and a number of things that went on. We learned very quickly to overcome those issues by segregating folks out based upon religion primarily and based upon tribe. Once we got that, we were able to get a lot done. But I'll tell you that, we had a serious and steep learning curve to overcome.
Yeah. Learning curves in war. That's one thing I've learned. Oh my gosh. It's like you have to learn the old lessons that had maybe been learned in the previous war, but then you always have to learn whatever new challenge your new environment throws up at you. And that's what makes me drop my jaw when I'm reading your book, is like, I just get the sense of you learning so much every day while you're there, learning what the needs are, what you don't have, what how to get what you do need. And then these really complex cultural issues that are happening all the time in a culture that you're totally unfamiliar with. I mean, people are
right. I'll tell you, Ken and the others that are on here that are Vietnam War veterans to tell you the same thing. If you make an assumption, you're going to be wrong. And I can tell you up front, you make every time and by the way, all of us, we live making assumptions. You'd be shocked at assumptions that you make about everything. You make an assumption about people and it would be absolutely wrong. One of my favorites is we ordered tents to put the part of a 101st Airborne Brigade into, ordered the tents, got them in place, and an unusual event occurred in Iraq. It rained, not very much, but it turns out that every tent leaked. And I went back to the contractor and said, "You screwed me over. I ordered tents." And he goes, "Well, you didn't order tents that were waterproof."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I had assumed that a tent is waterproof. Well, it's not. So then we had to do something else to fix that problem. Happen all the time. You make an assumption, you're wrong. And we were quick to do that. But you'd be amazed. The Iraqi systems, by the way, electrical systems are 2-wire systems. They don't have a ground system. And so we put in 3-wired systems. Now that may sound boring, but there's a point here. And I went to a contractor and I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And I had inspectors, but very few. And he goes, "I saved you a lot of money." And I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "I didn't put in your grounding wire." I go, "Well, okay, but that's, I paid you to put this grounding wire in, and because there were a number of U.S. service members that were actually electrocuted and died in Iraq because of failure to ground. And so it was pretty important to me to get a system that was safer, but they were saving me money. They were doing me a favor by only putting in a 2-wire system. So you never make assumptions. You always have to check the work, always. It's a constant. And it's good. I got along great with the Iraqis. The Iraqis that I worked with, it appeared anyway, they really liked what we did because we were helping them and helping Iraq at the same time. In fact, that's why I was one of the few lieutenant colonels that didn't have a price on his head, because they didn't want to mess with the engineers, because we were actually doing things for everybody. That was a good thing. They were great. In fact, I'm still in contact with many Iraqis to this day, years after I left the service.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, I get multiple messages almost every day from Iraqis that are still in Iraq, and others that are throughout the world.
That is
today.
fascinating.
So they're great. Yeah, they were. It's a great culture with a wonderful history. I talk about some of it in my book. That's supposedly where David met Goliath. I mean, the Garden of Eden supposedly was in Iraq. All these things are like the history of Iraq is fascinating. We knew nothing about it when we went there, and that caused us a number of consternations. There wasn't a cultural clash. It was just a matter of we did not understand. But Iraqis are like many people. If you attempt to speak with them in their language, salam alaikum. You're the best person since sliced bread. You're trying to be to understand them. And if you go to any culture, you'll find the same thing. If you try to work within their culture, they'll go out of their way to help you and protect you. We were protected by the Iraqis and what we did. And the engineers, we were out everywhere. We were all over the place. We went where people would never go. And the Iraqis there were to protect us.
Oh, how fascinating. I see, General, that Henry Shepke is with us. He's 14 years old from Madison, Wisconsin. And he put in the chat here that he has your autograph. Henry Shepke, can you, if you're available, could you say hi?
Hello.
How did you hear about General Satterfield?
I think it was my friend Don Nemchek who told me about him.
And you just wrote him for an autograph, and he was kind enough to send it to you?
Yeah.
How much did he charge you?
Nothing.
We know how these engineers are.
All you got to do is ask, right, Henry? That's all it takes sometimes.
That is so cool. That is so cool. And we have Caleb Craig, also another person who has thousands and thousands of autographs, a lot of them veterans autographs. Caleb and Henry collect the autographs and also the stories behind the people who wrote their script. I think it's such a wonderful thing for young people to do, a way to connect with history and a way to connect to our veterans. That is so neat.
I would ask Henry that if you get a chance, get the book, read it. It's written for, you don't have to be in the military to understand the book. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't use acronyms except for a couple places. I don't use acronyms. I assume that the reader does not know the military culture. Don't get me wrong, it helps you do, but I assume you don't have it. It was written for my grandchildren, which are much younger than you are, by the way. So that's good for me. They're much younger. That was the target audience. And I really never changed that much. I have to admit in my book that I had to take some things out because there are people that I say things about that the world shouldn't read about. There are a few that I left in there just for, it entertains me to leave their name in there. And one of them is an Ambassador Satterfield, which has the same last name. He and I went round and round for years, by the way. That's okay. And I'll leave his name in there. He's a big boy. He can take it. So read the book if you get a chance. I think you'll like it.
It's a wonderful book. It really is. And you're exactly right. It's not laden with jargon. A 13-year-old boy like me could read it and understand it and really, really learn from it. I'm fascinated by it. What made you want to write it?
Well, I mentioned it at the beginning. When I was growing up, I was told stories about my relatives. For example, I had one of my great grandfather was at the Battle of Gettysburg, and I'm thinking, he was fortunate because he was a color bearer. He was a sergeant. He was a color bearer, and color bearers had a life expectancy of about minus 10 minutes. So they were targeted all the time. He lived, fortunately for me, but I never knew anything else about him. So it was never. And of all those who served, they had another relative at the Battle of Brandywine in the Revolutionary War, and had them in the Spanish-American War. And I don't know anything about these people. So I wanted to put pen to paper, actually computer, and tell my kids at least about one of them. And I have what's also not in the book is I have a couple books of photographs that show that were taken when I was there at that time. And so now it's in print. They can read. And by the way, they all have their own copy. They can read what it was about at the time for me. Yeah. And pretty much unfiltered. I'm fairly unfiltered in the book. I'm pretty straightforward, except for not putting in classified information, which, by the way, doesn't really add to the book. Even if I had it there, it wouldn't matter because it's specific units and nobody cares anymore about that stuff. But I wrote it for the grandkids now, and now I'll tell them stories and I can say, hey, go read the book.
I'm so glad you wrote it that way. We said before the program started that as I was reading your book, and I certainly know that you speak a lot and write a lot about leadership, and you could have easily written this book as like 13 lessons I learned from, my first year in Iraq or something like that. You could have really focused it as a leadership book, and you didn't. You decided instead to share it as a story, and also you're kind of bearing witness to the experience of life on the ground in Iraq. It's not only, it's your story, but it's also you're speaking for a lot of men and women that you served there. And I think that's a especially wonderful thing to do. You've captured something. You've captured a moment in history.
Right. Well, and I said it to me, it's not history, it's my personal experience, but in a way it is history. There are lessons in there, but I don't enumerate them. For example, never make an assumption. That should be pretty straightforward. Another one is, believe it or not, is always tell the truth, or you're going to get sandblasted pretty by reality very fast. For those who have been in difficult circumstances, you better tell the truth, because if you don't, your buddy is gonna pay a price at some point in time. And that's the kind of lesson that's important to know just in life, as far as I'm concerned. I'll tell you something else. I saw some pretty ugly folks over there. You'd be surprised. And when I say ugly, I mean mean, and I'm talking US. But you don't have to be the prettiest person, the smartest, the strongest. But if you pay attention, you're not going to get your ass kicked. So pay attention. That's another lesson. That may sound simple, but today they don't teach that kind of stuff, especially to younger folks. They don't tell you. Oh, they'll say pay attention, but they won't tell you why.
They won't tell you why. They won't tell you, they won't illustrate the consequences of not paying attention, which can be dire.
Right. But you got to know your weaknesses. And believe me, I've got plenty of weaknesses. Again, the Vietnam folks that are on here tonight will tell you that you find your weaknesses pretty quick. And it's important that your buddy on your left and your buddy on your right knows your weakness, so they can cover for you. And I'm going to know their weaknesses as well. And of course, you got to know your strengths too, because we can make ourselves better with them. But the thing about combat is, when you first go into it, you don't know how you're going to react to the danger. You don't know. I don't care who you are, you simply don't know. And we were all fortunate that we didn't run from the battles. And so that was pretty darn important for me. After all those years, to be a coward would have been pretty severe. Fortunately, we were able to do quite well.
I'm loving this conversation. This is just, I'm trying to figure out where exactly to go, because you've just brought up so much that I think would resonate to so many people who are with us tonight and watching. I really admire your approach to leadership, especially you said early on before we went live, I think, that you really made an effort in Iraq, and just, I guess, throughout your career, of kind of talking with, privates, talking with people who high-ranking officers usually don't spend a lot of time talking to. Why is that?
My first active duty, I learned the hard way a lot. My first active duty location was in a little town called Siegelsbach in West Germany at the time. My first day on the job, after arriving at 3 a.m. at some out in the middle of nowhere outpost in January of late December of 1974, was that they line us up on the street. We're going to do a police call to pick up a bunch of trash that was out there. And the first sergeant, the senior sergeant of the company, goes, all NCOs step to the rear. In other words, all sergeants step to the rear so that they can monitor the progress of picking up the trash. Well, I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and out of about 24 people there was only 2 of us that were standing there, me and another private. And I'm thinking, oh goodness, is this what leadership is about? So yeah, the first sergeant said everybody in to do it. He was a good guy, so that was the good news. But I'll tell you that you pick up pretty quick on stuff from the military, and if you've been in the military, you learn pretty darn fast. There's some simple rules for life there, and there are life lessons that have come up all the time. If you don't pay attention, they're just going to kick you in the butt.
And you said also that when you talk to privates, they tell you the truth. If you really ask them and you want a candid view, what do you need? What do you think of this? What do you think of that? They'll hit you with the truth. They're blunt.
They're very blunt. And I love that. I mean, you get the unvarnished truth out of them, because they don't care. They don't care. You're not their you're not their first sergeant. If you're not their first sergeant, you're just another person at the table eating. They didn't care if you wore an eagle or a star or sergeant major rank. They didn't really care. They would tell you the truth. And some people said they were too scared to tell me anything but the truth. I don't think that's the case. But I'll tell you, I love talking to these guys and gals because you could learn so much so fast. For example, if power was a problem and there were a number of places that were not getting power, you'd be surprised. They're going to tell you. They'll tell you right away. Well, sir, they don't have power over here. Well, nobody told me about that because I was the guy that was responsible to make sure. And people, some of the senior officers above me would say, Satterfield, how'd you find out about it so quick? I go, well, this private told me. They would go, what are you doing talking to the privates? And I go, I have lunch with them every day when I can. When I'm not traveling, I have lunch with them every day. And they were going, well, that's no way to get good information. I go, you'd be amazed at the information you can get out of these guys. And I was a private. Could I know? I'd have probably crap my pants knowing that there was a colonel sit beside me asking me questions. I certainly wouldn't have been able to tell him anything but the truth. And that was good. But I tell you, the American soldier, Marine, Airman, Coastie, sailor, I'll tell you what, if you explain to them why they need to do something, they're probably going to do it for you without much of a problem. But if you just order them to do something, they'll do it only because you told them to, and they don't have their heart in it.
Right. They don't know the why.
Yeah, they don't know the why. They don't have their heart in it. That's what the New York Yankees taught me. They taught me about having heart in the game. And so you got to have heart in it. So it's how you deal with them. So I didn't have any problem talking to folks like that. It was a great break from me having to deal with a lot of senior people. I worked for a lot of very senior people, and many of you heard of, many of you didn't. General Odierno, who was the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, recently passed away, sadly.
Yes.
General Petraeus, you've heard of, and a number of others. General Casey, you may have heard of. I worked for a lot of them, and they were always very good to me, because they know if they gave me a task, I was most likely I could get it done. And it was a simple conversation because it was not about them controlling a combat formation. It was about a support effort, which that's what I did, being in the engineers. So they would say, hey, Doug, I'm moving a unit to over here, and I'm moving them in 2 weeks. Can you make sure that they have adequate water? I understand we're out of water at that location. I go, sure, I'll take care of it. Now you got to remember, this is a desert environment. Water is very difficult to get. It's not laying in a lake or in a river. Most of the water you get to, once you get away from the major rivers, is through canals. And canals have their own set of problems, but it's ingenious the way they're laid out there. So you get problems all the time. And they would just say, hey, Doug, could you take care of it? And I would. And I did it ethically and legally, which some people think they should not do it that way, but I would do it the right way, which because I got to live with myself, after a while.
You mentioned several people that you served with, and John Ferguson here just put it in the chat. Did you ever serve or have contact with the General Gus Pogonis?
No, I have
he
not.
would have. He's from the Pittsburgh area, and he's going to be our guest actually on January 26th, in the morning of January 26th. And he was in charge of logistics in the first Gulf War, William Gus Pogonis. So I just emailed him today. We also have a question from Rick Arisman. Have you visited the new Army Museum, the National Museum of the United States Army at Fort Belvoir?
No, I have not. Although I have been to Fort Belvoir many, many times, but no, I've not seen the new one. No.
Okay. We did a trip there, a Veterans Breakfast Club trip there, at the September 30th, October 1st. We did the Army Museum and then the Marine Corps Museum. I will not say which one is better.
Okay, that's good for you. Although I tell you, I have promised my wife to go back down to DC sometime this summer. So I will put that on my list of places that we need to visit. Clearly, the Vietnam Wall, and all the other military statues and that adorn, obviously, there. I I have a number of good friends who are buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Obviously, I will stop there to pay my respects. I have 13 of my good friends that are buried there. None of which from my first tour. They were all from my second tour. So it was a much bloodier effort at that time. And so I will go see them. I had 4 actually killed in the same event. So it was pretty tragic. You may have heard it was actually a helicopter shoot down, and 4 of my good friends died there. And but that's number 1 on my list, and I'll make sure that Fort Belvoir is on there as well.
Yeah, you may want to visit the Marine Corps Museum first. I'm just saying.
Okay.
Not that it's better, but if you miss the Army Museum, that's okay. You can catch up another time. But the Marine Corps Museum, wow, is it great?
I'm sure.
But I don't. It really is. The Marine Corps Museum is absolutely beautiful. Connor Ritchie, you have a question here that you put into the chat here to me. He has a question about your father's service. Did your father serve in the Army?
No, he did not. He did not serve in the military at all. He was of the age to be drafted, and he was drafted to the Korean War. But as they were headed to induction, they came on and said, "Are there any married men among this group?" And he was one of a handful. And they said, "Get off the bus. We're not drafting married men anymore." And so I guess that was good for me. I don't know, but yeah, no, he did not serve. He was probably the only one that did not serve in the military, going back to the 1700s in my family. Now, my uncle, his brother was actually at the Battle of the Bulge in 101st Airborne. So his brother was serving. His brother was quite a few years older, so he was there, and a number of others on my mother's side as well served in the Navy and the Air Force too.
Could you talk a little bit? And I see coming from the waiting room here is Daggy Weiss Snodgrass, and I just want to say welcome her. She's going to be our guest Wednesday morning, and I know that she's trying to connect on Zoom. So let me see if I see Daggy. Just want to make sure. I saw that she was trying to come in. Okay. Hey, Ellie or Sean, if you see Daggy.
Yeah, Daggy is with us. Hi, Daggy. If you would like to unmute yourself, we can say hi to you.
Oh, I see Daggy. Hi, Daggy. How are you? Good to see you. Hey, you could do it. Thank you. Good. Daggy's going to be joining us on Wednesday morning. Daggy grew up in Berlin in World War II. She was a young woman who received the wonderful candy from the candy bomber, Gail Halverson, who, gosh, he's now 101 years old.
Wow.
I believe. And he was on our program in 2020. Daggy, so good to see you. Thank you for joining us, Daggy.
You're welcome.
This is great. I know when you were on last time, you were there really to honor Gail.
Yeah,
that was a wonderful thing. And we certainly want you to talk about that again during the Berlin airlift. But on Wednesday, we're going to focus on what your life was like growing up in Berlin in World War II. Thank you for being willing to join us. And you're going to be joining us from, are you from Nebraska? No, Missouri, Independence, Missouri.
Springfield, Missouri.
Springfield, Missouri. Very good. So you did it, Daggy. Good. I'm glad that you did it. I know that you were a little concerned whether you could get on.
Yeah, this is my dry run here, my trying. And I got in. So I should be getting in on the 5th, okay?
Very good, Daggy. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you gave it a dry run.
Stay for us, please. We're dealing with COVID.
What did you say?
With COVID here in our family.
Oh.
My husband lost a son on the 15th due to COVID.
Oh, no.
My family is sick after Christmas due to COVID. I'm the one doing all right, so I'm planning on being with you on the 5th.
Okay, take care.
We are all holding out strong. Okay.
Good. Very good, Dagmar.
But I wanted to get this dry run to make sure I would get you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you doing that, and take care of yourself. Stay healthy, stay safe. Oh my gosh. My brother-in-law who lives next door, my niece who lives next door, they both have it. They've been vaccinated and boosted, but they're still sick as anything. And yeah, it's
It's hard. It's
hard.
hard. But
hard.
we have a belief and we are hanging on. We know that things will be okay. I
Thank
have a
you, Jackie.
question. If any one
Sure.
of my friends want to tune in on the 5th, can they do that?
Yes, they can. You can just send them the link that I sent you.
Okay, I will do that with your permission.
Please do. We'd love to have anybody join us who wants to.
All right, I will do that.
All right. Thank you. See you, Daggy.
I will
Hey,
see all
Daggy,
of you.
Daggy,
Bye-bye.
I have a question for you, Daggy. Are you from Berlin?
Berlin.
Originally? From
Berlin.
Berlin, yes. I've been there, but I spent most of my time in Fürth, next to Nuremberg,
Oh,
and
I see.
in a little town called Siegelsbach, close to Heilbronn, out west. So those were the places I spent, and of course I traveled over the country. I loved Germany.
Yeah.
It was West Germany at the time for me,
Yeah.
and I loved the country and the people that were there, and at the time spoke Deutsch, and but today I have lost it all, I think, after all that time. But a great, wonderful country.
Yeah, I haven't been home since 2020. Wait a minute, 2004.
Okay.
So it's been a long time. And before that, I wasn't home for 48 years.
Wow.
So money-wise and so forth couldn't be done, you know.
Yeah.
So 48 years went by before I got to go home, and that was in 2004. Since then, I have lost all my family. I'm the matriarch of our little family that is still left at 87 and holding and holding.
Good for you. Good for you. Well,
And
thank
you know,
you.
the
Thank you.
stories that we have to tell, we are the ones that I'm in my higher 80s, and the others are all in their 90s.
Right.
We need to tell our stories and let people know this is really the way it was. And you know, they need to know, they need not to forget, so that this country will keep up the good work.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing your stories.
Well, I look forward being with all of you. You know, we're a military family, and we look forward to do whatever we can do. So I thank all of you already. I thank all of you.
Thank you, Daggy. Oh, is this great? Oh, this is fun. Thank you very much. Doug, I want to go back to your year in Iraq, 2004, 2005. And I think there are a couple things that people will find surprising. I know I did. I did not understand the restrictions that the Army was under to build anything in Iraq or anywhere. Could you talk a little bit about those restrictions and how you were able to finesse them and build the infrastructure that the soldiers needed there?
There are not to downplay it, but there are two main restrictions. The number one restriction is money. Clearly, you got to have the money to build. You have to pay people. You have to have the materials. The other is getting the materials to your location. In a perfect world, your materials are already there. That is not the case. So that is a competing issue anytime you do large scale construction, because we spent tens of millions of dollars to get things done correctly. And you certainly don't want to build things two times. But there are restrictions on the money, and the restrictions are set by Congress. So as an example, at that time, there was a $250,000 limit on building new structures. And what that does is it puts Congress in a position to control the purse strings of any effort that's going on in the world that is directed by the president. The president is the one who directed us there. There was no declaration by Congress, but now Congress has an ability to rein things back in. And so there was that restriction that was always sitting on top of us. It made it difficult for me, who had a single focus of making sure that things were built properly, to have enough money on time to get things done. I will tell you though that I learned that learning to deal with those restrictions was a good thing in understanding how the U.S. government worked. The material issue was another issue, trying to get the right materials in. We regularly did not have sufficient quality materials to build with. The earliest, as an example, everybody will understand this. Everybody understands how concrete works. But the original concrete that we used in our structures, you could take a cube this size and crush it with your hands. That's how poor the concrete was. So we had to do and undertake a number of efforts in order to improve the quality of the concrete. Otherwise, you pour a concrete structure and it'll collapse under its own weight. And of course, we built a lot with concrete because wood is rare and hard to get in a desert like in Iraq. There, other than a few palm trees that are growing dates, there's no wood. So any wood we brought in had to be brought in from some other location. And we didn't bring in much wood because as soon as it got there, the wood would be eaten by the termites and other insects. And so we used concrete very heavily, as did the Iraqis. We paid close attention to what the Iraqis did, by the way. You know, what are they doing? Oh, we should duplicate that.
Yeah, they've been living there 5,000 years. They probably know how to build in this environment, right?
And they did, and they built stuff for us, and they would give us suggestions how to do things. The only thing that we did differently for the smaller structures is we used rebar. We used the steel bars to reinforce our work, where they didn't use rebar on small stuff. We did. They used it on the big things, but they didn't use it on small stuff. But we did. So we had enough rebar. But other than that, they were able to show us an enormous amount of tricky tricks to do things that would make a structure go up very fast. And of course, you had to treat them properly, like you would with respect. And if you did that, they would show you, they would do anything for you. And they did. They were happy. In fact, the Iraqis the bad guys always seemed to know where the U.S. military was located. But they never, in my first tour there, they would not attack engineer convoys. They would not attack them. The word was out, leave them alone. And they would. We look just like everybody else. So it says that, number one, they know where we are. And number two, they've got the word out not to attack us. Now that changed later. So that was good news for us. So they were never attacking the engineers. Now, engineers were killed and injured in attacks, but that's when they were often mixed in with other units that were doing convoy operations, but never as a single convoy. We ran in over 55 convoys that I were in that were pure engineers, never got attacked, not a single time.
And once again, when you arrived in Iraq in early 2004, this is a time when the insurgency is really beginning to take off. And things like that, we had heard of roadside mines before from Vietnam, but now we're calling them IEDs, and we're learning that this is from my perspective back home. We're learning that the Humvees aren't under armored or are under armored. They don't have the armor underneath to protect from IEDs, and some of them even have canvas coverings that aren't going to stop bullets. And all these things are going on. Can I ask you, sir, how you dealt with the fear?
And by the way, they were also not air conditioned. Another issue. That goes back to the idea of what are you going to do when you're put in a circumstance that forces you to do something you do not want to do. Yes. And fear drives us, I admit. However, we're fortunate. We had good training. We were out of Fort Sill, by the way, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. We were the engineers out of Fort Sill. So we did an enormous amount of training at Fort Sill on combat operations in convoy operations. So what do? I think that helped eliminate a lot of the fear. We never had to use it because they didn't attack our convoys, but our engineer convoys. But frankly, there were a number of folks in our unit that had some problems, but for the most part, they were able to get over it after a short period of time. There were some of us that were out all the time, and it was just another. You never thought of that. You knew what to do if you were attacked, and you did it. And other than that, they were. I think you talk to people in your unit, and you got to remember, who do you fight for when you're there. If you're in a fight, which we got in fights, just not on convoys, when you get in a fight, who are you fighting for? And I'll tell you, you're fighting for your buddy next to you. You're not fighting for some amorphous, thing in pie in the sky. You're fighting for survival. You're fighting for the guy beside you.
Yeah.
That's what you do. And if you can hold your unit integrity, whether it be a squad or a platoon or a company, if you can hold that together, then you're gonna be okay. Because at the time, the insurgents, and there were terrorists, by the way, too. The insurgents were mostly Iraqis. They would melt if you stood up to them. They'd melt away. The terrorists you had to kill them. That was all there was to it, because they did not back away. The terrorists tended to be international terrorists, and there were two groups, and you would never, ever be captured by either one, because that was a very bad thing. And so we always had the rule: you fight to the death. We never had to, but that's what you would do. It's just a way of life, because you don't want to be captured over there. You've heard the stories. I don't need to repeat them. And but fear, I other than getting shot at occasionally, it was never really something I gave a lot of thought to. And those that worked with me, it was just another day for them. We called it Groundhog Day sometimes, because it seemed like it was the same thing over and over.
Same darn thing over and over.
Yeah. And but we, there was just too many things happening, too many responsibilities to concern yourself with fear.
I want to invite anybody who has a question, who would like to ask a question of Doug Satterfield, who's so generously given us his time to talk about the worst year in Iraq in 2004, 2005 as an engineer there. Please do just unmute yourself, ask the question, raise your hand, put it in the chat, whatever you'd like to do. Hey, Bob Miswa, how are you, Bob?
Oh, hanging in there, Todd.
Good.
Hey, Doug, I was stationed with the 458 Combat Engineers at a Camp Victory for the entire year of 2004. Although I was in the S4 section, the battalion commander come in and looked at me one day and said, "You're now the mayor of the brigade area. Forget about doing any S4 work." So I had to deal with KBR. I'll give you an example of some stuff I encountered. One thing I noticed, I've gone through every shower unit in the battalion brigade area. They had how should I put it, non-water saving shower heads. I forgot how many gallons per minute. So I asked about getting some. Well, the KBR people were shuffling and avoiding my question and to answer. So I called I was able to call my father-in-law, who owned the store, Carnegie Supply Company in Carnegie, and I said, "Max, can you get me a gross water-saving shower heads?" He said, "They'll be on their way tomorrow." Within 1 to 2 weeks, I had them, $1.99 each. My father-in-law ate the cost, a World War II veteran, very proud of this country, and so I got them all installed. I installed a lot of my own self, take the old ones off, some Teflon tape, cut our water consumption in half. We were the only brigade area that had enough water. They were running the damn trucks over there to the Iraqis to get water. We didn't have to do it as often. And so finally it worked its way up to a brigade. Hey, the mayor down there, he got this through. So they jumped all over KBR. KBR didn't work. Okay, guess what KBR charged for the same shower heads?
Probably quite a bit.
Oh, I think it was $9.99 or $10.99 is what they billed Uncle Sugar. And I'm going, okay, if my father-in-law's wholesale cost was $1.99, where'd the other $9 or $10 go to? Did that go into Dick Cheney's retirement fund since he retired from Halliburton, owner of KBR?
Hey, Bob, we don't do politics here.
Well, that's not politics. That's economics. That's pure economics.
No, I know.
And
You're right, Bob. It is economics. Kellogg, Brown, and Root, and this is an issue that Doug addresses in his book. He talks about KBR, Kellogg, Brown, and Root. They're a very large engineering aerospace firm that was a very large contractor in Iraq. I think they had like 15,000 people at one time, private contractors, right?
They offered me a job before I left Iraq and do that. They approached me and say, "Hey, how'd you like to come work for us? We'll start you off at 100 grand. You'll probably get out of here at 150. Your first 80,000 is going to be tax free." So I called my wife. Hey, But it took 2 weeks of, I don't like the dust. I don't like the sand fleas. I don't care for the culture. Hun, I'm coming home. Hell with the 100 to 150,000 bucks, you know.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I'll tell you though, overall, I found KBR to be in a few cases slow, but overall, overall though, I found KBR to be extraordinarily expensive, but also extraordinarily efficient and getting things done where I was. But you got to remember, I had a different relationship than you did. I was for the 1st Cavalry Division, which was essentially Baghdad and the 50 miles around Baghdad. If I said I wanted something done, that's Doug Satterfield, because I was the senior construction guy, they did what I said. But they billed the military some ungodly amount of dollars.
Hey,
but
did you ever attend any of our mayor meetings there?
Where were you again in Victory?
Camp Victory. I'd go to meetings up there at the
Oh yeah,
general headquarters.
Oh yeah, I went to a lot of the meetings. I would not go to all of them because actually my unit had a guy who was the mayor for us as well.
Okay. What was his name?
I don't remember. No, I don't remember his name. I'm terrible with names. You know, in the military, they print your name on you, and I got dependent upon that, so I don't remember. I'll probably think of it later, but yeah, he would go to most of those meetings. I would go to a few, but it was pretty rare because I was just pulled in too many directions to attend a meeting like that. I went to a number of meetings there, and I went out to visit a number of mayors. And by the way, for those who don't know, the mayor.
What are you talking about mayors here? Yeah, what does this mean, mayor? Can you explain that?
A mayor is the person that, and you help me out here with this, Bob, was sort of the person that sat on a geographic plot within a base that controlled things like who goes where, who gets a certain living arrangement, who, things would come up like, hey, we want to build something new. It has to go through the mayor to make sure it doesn't conflict with something else. They were a cell typically of several people who would actually coordinate events that go on within that small geographic plot. The geographic plot may be, by the way, Victory Base Camp had 10 bases within it, just to give you some idea. Victory Base was the name. It was Victory Base was one of the 10. It was called Victory Base Complex, and it had all these different bases in it. So if you wanted to do something in a base, you really need to talk to the mayor to make sure that there was not something else happening. And they kept all this stuff straight. It's a great concept. I liked it. The mayors were great with me. I enjoyed talking to them, but no, not usually. I did not attend the meetings. By the way, I went to a lot of meetings, and if I could eliminate a meeting, I would eliminate a meeting. Believe me.
Bob, are you saying, Bob, that you were a mayor?
Yeah.
You were?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's just like they said, forget about your S4 duties. I was like the ends, even though I retired as a major, I went over there as a sergeant because there's some things I didn't want to jump through hoops to go back in.
Right.
So they referred to me as the major sergeant when I went to the mayor meetings because everybody found out about my combat experience prior to that in Vietnam, and so all these colonels and majors and captains, they're looking at me, out of the corner side. Well, what the hell does he know that I don't know?
Yeah, right.
I got to ask you, Bob, where physically were you located in Victory Base Complex? You say the 458th. Just
I'm trying to think of where I've got it on the thumb drive. The map of I have the thumb drive, the map, and the names because I assigned everybody to their, I don't know which one, those trailers were pieces of crap.
Yeah,
down there in Arab Emirates. But I remember, some major comes in strutting, what the hell are you doing putting that captain up in row 2 and I'm in row 3? That kind of stuff. Pettiness. Oh, you had to deal with it. And like with that, okay, let me go talk to Captain Smith. Thank God Captain Smith was willing to move down to row 3 to let Major so-and-so move up to row 2 so he could be closer to the battalion commander.
That's why I loved having mayors because they had to deal with that and I did not have to deal with that.
Hey, one good experience I had with KBR, one of the maintenance engineers, I had a nice relationship. I don't know if you remember the problem with troops getting electrocuted in a shower units.
Oh, I'm well aware of that.
Oh God, I remember. So he came down one time and I worked out a deal with him. He took care of everyone in my battalion in one day. Needless to say, he got his favorite bottle of whiskey from me. Unbeknownst that who sent it to him, I just got the old wink and a nod afterwards. And from that day on, we had a nice friendly relationship. And sometimes you had to do stuff like that,
That's
right. Except I didn't deal with any alcohol, because that was Journal Order number 1, as you remember, no alcohol. But
oh God, the Iraqis were selling it, and they're coming down collecting the garbage, and they got some Johnny Walker Red. Hey, you interested? And the troops were buying it from the garbage men.
Bob, you'll probably recognize the map he's got on there. You see Victory Base Complex. They list 3 of the 10 bases that were there. So yeah, Camp Liberty was a late name for Camp Victory, which is part of the oh, by the way, here's another fun fact. Names of these bases changed all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, they were always changing.
Very confusing to me. Yeah, that's very confusing as a historian trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so when you say Camp Victory, it has a lot of meaning. So you need to be careful in its use.
Yes.
Because there was more than one Camp Victory. But if a unit moved into a base, they would always change the name.
Yeah.
To something that was important to them.
Important to
Victory,
them. Right.
Victory came originally from the 1st Armored Division. That's part of their motto, is victory. That's how that name originally was established. Fortunately, Camp Victory as a complex never changed its name, but all the smaller bases and some of the bases at Camp Victory Base, the names changed. We had to use a spreadsheet to keep track, but it was just too confusing for us.
Clem Blazewick. Hey, Clem, how are you? I saw that you had your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute if you can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. How you doing, Clem? Happy New Year.
I'm very good. Happy New Year to you and everybody too. Doug, very interesting program. Thank you. I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Thanks, Clem.
I'm curious about communications, how the soldiers were able to communicate with back home. Were they pretty free to use cell phones, or was there a military communication system set up? Were there any restrictions on their abilities and capabilities of calling home?
Great question, by the way. And on the front of my book, you actually see some communication towers there. You remember the old Mars system, the old military system where you could call home from overseas. We actually used internet cafes. We did not use cell phones. There were some satellite phones, but they were rare and they were only allocated to certain people. I did not have one issued to me as an example. I wasn't important enough. But yeah, they would use internet cafes to do that. They were usually set up initially, at least by AT&T, and you could go in there and you could send information home and make phone calls from there. That's how we did it. But we used satellite uplinks to make that happen. And you had to be a smart Como guy to really figure that out. But yeah, that's what we did. We would send it up, kind of like using, if you call inside your home today with your cell phone, if you do it right, you can actually use Wi-Fi. Similar concept, but it was uploaded to a satellite instead of cell towers. You could communicate internally in parts of Baghdad with a cell phone, but it ran through an Iraqi system, which meant it was not only unclassified, but somebody was listening to you while you were talking. Right. But that was the best way, and it was a common way to do it. Unfortunately, they would charge soldiers sometime to use their facilities, but it was a nominal charge. But you could do that. If you wanted to communicate with somebody back in the States, I called my daughter. I remember I had to do it 3 o'clock in the morning on her birthday. I would go down to the internet cafe, as we called it, the AT&T internet cafe, and I would make a phone call from there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, it was hard to do. The best way to do it was actually email. If you could get to a machine, I did have access to a computer, then you could send an unclassified email from the unclassified system. You couldn't do it from a classified system. So most of my communication with my relatives was via email.
Very good. Thank you very much, Doug.
Here is the cover of Doug's book, Our Longest Year in Iraq, 1st Cavalry Division Construction Engineers in the Iraq War 2004-2005 by Brigadier General Doug Satterfield, who's with us. We have a few more minutes left. I have to get back to something that you say early in the book, Doug, that I find so endearing, and I think it comes through in just our conversation here, is that you say that, you know, after this long Army career and all that you achieved, your proudest moment is still when you made Buck Sergeant?
That's it. Buck Sergeant, just like in combat, the series from the 1960s, I think.
Yeah.
The show
Morrow.
Combat, where Buck Sergeant Saunders was the lead of his squad in World War II. That was my goal in life, to make Buck Sergeant in the infantry, and I did.
And you did it, and some.
I did it. Everything else was just gravy at that point. Yeah, because you have the most direct effect on people being a squad leader. Now, I'm talking Army and Marine talk, but I don't know so much about the Air Force and the Navy. But when you're in charge of 10 men in the infantry, it was men. When you have in charge of 10 men, they're responsible for their lives and their well-being. Nothing else you can be more responsible for than that directly. It's a direct relationship with them, face to face. You can't beat that. That's the best.
Yep. I'm going to share also your blog here. You have the Leader Maker, a blog about senior executive leadership. There's a lot of great stuff about leadership here. And I think we could all hear that you have a lot of wisdom in your, there's a wisdom in your voice that just comes through very powerfully. And it's also, I have to say, I'm trying to say this without sounding insulting to other people. You're a brigadier general. You come across as very down to earth and very relatable. And that is that's something special, I think, that we don't always see. And, you know, our senior executive leaders in society, no matter whether it's military or non-military. Is that something that you made sure that you did as you rose in rank, that you kind of kept your feet on the ground?
Well, yes. My philosophy in the military was always to stay at the lowest level possible that was closest to the troops, which meant when I was a commander of a company commander, a battalion commander, a brigade commander, when I was commander at those levels, that's being a troop. You're in charge of troops directly, in this case, soldiers. And to me, that was the best thing there was. So I always stayed at the lowest possible level. In other words, I could have always opted to go to the Pentagon as a major or lieutenant colonel. Worked in the Pentagon for a while. You got to be a staff officer, got it. But to me, that's not something I wanted to do. In fact, I told people one time, they said, "We're sending you to the Pentagon." I said, "Well, then I'm resigning from the military. I'm done. I'm not going there." And you know, looking back, it would have been better for my career, but career wasn't the issue to me. Mine was, I want to be around people, and you can't be around people so much as a staff officer. Now, I did that, yeah, but I didn't go to the Pentagon after all that. One time they tried to make, I was an operations staff officer or an executive officer or chief of staff. I was never an admin officer, and I was never a logistics officer. And I told people, if you make me one, I'll quit. Not because I didn't like them. It was because that was a weakness on mine. Looking back, I should have done it. I would have learned a hell of a lot, but it was my weakness. And I did not want to get into an area that I considered my weakness. I wanted to stay in my strong point which was operations and being able to be with the troops directly. I did not like being a staff officer. I spent too much time doing that. I like being in command. I like knowing that there are people around. And by the way, in Iraq, I was a staff officer doing this, but I had the ability to get things done, which was nice. Because of the rank, lieutenant colonel, you could get a lot done at the time.
You had a practice of taking a room where you're going to hold meetings and removing all the chairs from them. Could you explain why?
I've done that before. It's an interesting technique to get the meeting over with quickly. Okay. I've done that a number of times. I get the dirtiest looks when I do that, and they're not going to say anything to me. They would not dare say anything to me. but meetings go mighty quickly and mighty efficiently when you take the chairs out. Nobody's going to be pontificating on what they did today, because the guy standing or gal standing next to him is going to give him a dirty look and say, knock off the BS, because there was a lot less BS going on when you have to stand up to do the meeting. Yeah, it's a technique.
That's great. You're a fine writer. You've demonstrated that with this book. Do you have another book in the works? Do you have a series of books in the works?
I'm at the very early stage of two. One involves my second tour, which was the surge. Almost everybody's heard of the surge in Iraq. I want to talk about a little bit different angle most people do not talk about. I want to talk about the build up to the surge, which means building all those things you have to do to make the surge from an infrastructure standpoint successful. Now that may sound boring. I got to figure out a way to make it interesting. The other book is a book on leadership, junior leadership, primarily directed to teenagers and young adults. I'm working on both simultaneously. I've not got very far because life gets in the way sometimes of writing, and that's a fact of life. But yes, I have two. Which one gets up first, I do not know yet. The first one on the surge is a very academic type book. The one on leadership will be very down to earth. I think it'll be more similar to what I wrote in this book, which I think is much more readable. And by the way, it was a lot of fun to write. I just for everybody's information, I used to keep these green books, and in them I would write notes, and I numbered the pages, and I had the dates and stuff. So when I wrote this book, I just opened all these little books, and all the, not everything, but a lot of the dates, the times, the places, it was all there. And so when I write a date, something happened on the date in my book, that's when it happened, because I know, because I took it right. I can never remember, but it's amazing that when I reread my notes, and most of it is just a to-do list. When I read my notes, I think, yeah, I remember that now, where I wouldn't have never remembered it before. And sometimes I'll actually write something about people. Oh, I definitely could not publish that. I have to do something else.
Well, General Satterfield, our mission here at the VBC is to spread education and inspiration, and you've done both of those things for us tonight, and I'm very grateful to you. Thank you so much, General. I want to welcome you to come back anytime you want to join us. Would love to have you if you don't mind. Great. I'll make sure that you get our schedule updates.
Please do.
Come on whenever you'd like. Would love to have you.
Well, thank you very much. Ken, Bob, Henry, all those that were on tonight. Thank you so much. It's truly an honor to do this. Hey, I'm not here to plug my book. That's not what it's about. I'm here really to tell people a little bit about what really happened in Iraq. And if you read the newspapers, you're not getting the real story.
No, not in the least. Bob Riley, thank you for connecting us. You're the one that made this program happen, Bob. Thank you for being the connector, introducing Doug to me, getting him on here.
Welcome. Well done, Todd. Well done, General. Bravo Zulu, I think is a term. Right.
And by the way, on my blog, I talk about Bob Riley today. So go out to my blog and read about Bob Riley today.
Good. Yeah. Hopefully you're dishing some dirt so we could, No,
none of that.
Oh, come on. All right. All right. Bob, General, thank you. Good night, everybody. I hope to see you Wednesday morning with Daggy and George Zagstra. Take care.